Hello and welcome to Who's the Bossk? It's a Star Wars podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 192 of Who's the Bossk, and we will be discussing the new series of animated shorts on Disney Plus called Star Wars Tales of the Empire from Lucasfilm Animation. Very excited to talk about that. And for that discussion, I have invited back on the show a guest who has appeared in every season of Who's the Bossk so far. And that is a fellow Star Wars podcaster, a Star Wars author, who we're going to talk about her new book in a second here. And thank you so much for coming back on the show, Tricia Barr. Really glad to have you back on.
Glad to be here and talk about one of my favorite things coming out of Star Wars right now.
Amazing. Glad you enjoyed it, and very much looking forward to talking about it with you as well. How have you been otherwise? And can I ask what's been going on over at Fangirl blog and Fangirls Going Rogue?
I have a non-spoiler review of Tales of the Empire there at Fangirl blog, but if you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, maybe come back and read the
Okay.
review.
Right.
And Fangirls Going Rogue, we sort of bypassed the Bad Batch and talked about Tales of the Empire for specific reasons. So you could check out that too if you want to have a really in-depth discussion about it.
Fantastic. And I saw that you have contributed to another new Star Wars reference book. The book is called Star Wars Encyclopedia, The Definitive Guide to the Star Wars Galaxy. It's coming out October 1st. Tell me a little bit about this. You're one of several authors who put this together. And what can fans expect from this book?
For for my part, mostly it's stuff I've already written. So
Okay.
you'll see some authors on there that have written a lot of resource books, and probably what you're going to see is stuff I've written about the Clone Wars mostly, and things beyond that have been updated. But yeah, if you are looking for details about Star Wars and to be up to date, that's the place to go.
Terrific. So that's coming out this fall. Like I said, you have appeared on every season of Who's the Bossk, and that means you're up to level 5, the fifth and final level of the 5 Star Wars questions. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay, great. The first of the 5 Star Wars questions, level 5. Do you have a favorite Star Wars movie poster?
My knee jerk was to say The Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
But then I went to my all time favorite is the Phantom Menace poster with Anakin with the shadow of Darth Vader. I think that's just, if you were going to say something about your story with a poster, that's the poster I would think of.
Yeah, really, really memorable teaser poster of young Jake Lloyd as Anakin Skywalker there standing in Mos Espa with the or is it at the Lars Homestead or one of those places, and they've got the shadow of Darth Vader there behind him, and yeah, so cool looking. Definitely got everybody excited back in 1999 for that movie to come out. Number 2, what is your favorite Star Wars fight scene or action sequence?
I'm going to go with Anakin and Obi-Wan and Revenge of the Sith just because it pays off everything, right? There's the expectation, and the Phantom Menace fight scene sort of implies what that could be, but Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor paid off like all the emotions and all everything. They worked so hard on that. I remember just following just how hard they were working on it. And when it got there, it was like, yeah, this is what you'd expect from those two characters.
Yeah, and that was something we had anticipated for so long. Like, I remember growing up in the prequel era, and I don't know why we knew that that battle was gonna take place, like, on a lava planet. I don't know where that information came from, but we for whatever reason, we knew there was some big fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan, uh, over, big lava flows, and we finally got to see that in Revenge of the Sith, and it definitely turned out pretty cool. Number 3, what, in your opinion, is the coolest on-screen Star Wars costume? And I ask my guests to be specific about this one. Don't just say Han Solo, but say Han Solo in his Bespin costume. You know what I'm talking about. Which one is your favorite?
I think the person who's wearing the most costumes, Padme, out
Yeah.
of any character. And I've had the pleasure of covering the costume exhibit multiple times and different iterations that they've done it. And I'd say Padme's funeral gown. I know it's like not the place I want to see Padme, but the dress is just phenomenal. And the work they did on it I mean, all our costumes are amazing, but that one just blows me away.
Great. So the funeral gown from Revenge of the Sith
Yep.
also, very good choice. Yeah, that's a definitely a memorable outfit. Number 4. Okay, this is the negative one of all the 5 Star Wars questions. If you had the power to erase one piece of Star Wars media or one element of the Star Wars franchise from existence, what would it be?
I didn't even have to debate this one. It was the book
Okay.
Crucible.
Okay, I'm not sure if I know which one that is.
That's the last book, I believe, in the Fate of the Jedi, or when they were coming out. It was the end of the expanded universe before they made it all legends. So that was written by
Okay.
Troy Denning, and it was just, it was not a good book, and it just wasn't a good book for Luke or Leia or Han or any of those characters. I just want it to pretend like it doesn't exist.
So not a strong book to go out on, I
No.
guess. If you if they had, decided to maybe go back and add more books to the Legends continuity, is that something you'd be interested in seeing?
Absolutely. I think that the characters, particularly like Jaina Solo, Jason Solo, anything. I, there are a lot of characters I would love to see come back, and they might not necessarily end up in a movie, but
Yeah.
there's things I would love to see. Young Jedi Knight stories. I'd say I'd like to see the Sword of Jedi. I would not like to see Christy Golden write it, but I would I would take that book in a heartbeat. So
I think the only thing they've done that's even remotely close to that is with the comics. They did the 108th issue of the old Marvel Star Wars comics. For whatever reason, they decided to go back and do that. So I guess anything's possible. We'll see if that ever comes to be. Number 5, the fifth and final of the 5 Star Wars questions, level 5. This is more positive, looking forward to the future of the Star Wars franchise. What do you personally want to see happen with Star Wars in the future?
I would say, well, I can't say specific. I'm just looking forward to whatever comes from Dave Filoni and whatever he's moving towards. I feel like there's kind of this cohesiveness,
Yeah.
and it may not be exactly what the EU was back in the day. It's kind of evolving it, but I feel like, and we're going to maybe talk about this when we talk about Tales of the Empire, that there's some vision to kind of bring some things back into there.
Yeah, people have to remember that, it was just this past Thanksgiving that Dave Filoni was named as the creative chief creative officer. So it's going to be a couple years before we start seeing the output that comes out of that. And I'm very curious to see how the overall strategy changes or improves. But yeah, I'm also very much looking forward to seeing what that looks like. Okay, that's the end of the 5 Star Wars questions. We'll go into Star Wars headlines for this week. Now, we did all the May the 4th news back in the previous episode, but there were some other headlines coming out on Revenge of the 5th or Revenge of the 6th. Now we're doing, apparently, people can't make up their minds which one it is, but we got a trailer for a new Lego Star Wars animated series. It's 4 episodes, 4 parts, coming out September 13th. The title is Lego Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy. And the thing that people are freaking out the most about regarding this is Darth Jar Jar, which kind of pays off a long running fan theory inside joke. Did you check out this trailer? And if so, what are your thoughts on this upcoming Lego Star Wars special, Rebuild the Galaxy?
Anything Lego is just A plus, so I'm here for it. They just have so much fun with the franchise and kind of poke fun at it in a ways that other pieces of the media out of the Lucasfilm can't do.
Right, because it kind of takes place outside of what they would call the canon. I know that you don't agree with that term, but yeah, it's not within the same continuity, let's say, as the mainline Star Wars releases. So they do get to have a little bit more fun with the familiar iconography and the characters. And yeah, I'll be looking forward to that coming September 13th to Disney Plus. We now going back 25 years, Star Wars The Phantom Menace came out, the first of the Star Wars prequels, directed by George Lucas. And in celebration of that 25th anniversary, they have re-released the movie into theaters, and it did pretty well, earning over $14 million globally during the opening weekend of this re-release. I got to see it at the El Capitan Theater here in Los Angeles. Had a great time going to see that for the first time in a while on the big screen. Did you get a chance to see it, Tricia?
I was in a packed theater on May the 3rd, and I enjoyed it very much. I've probably watched the movie 100 times,
Yeah,
and most of those times have been on a little screen, and it's great to enjoy little bits of things that you don't notice. You know, when you're on the big screen, you're like, oh, look at that little character, that little
right.
detail. And the pod race, I think, is amazing on the big screen.
Definitely. Yeah, the pod race, the final lightsaber duel for sure. Um, very exciting to see. Always very exciting to see a Star Wars film on the big screen. I hope they keep doing these re-releases, especially now that it made a decent amount of money. Hopefully, as each anniversary goes by, they'll keep putting these back in the theaters. I think people always get excited to see more Star Wars on the big screen. In the world of comic books, we had a few releases this week, a couple from Free Comic Book Day, which was this past Saturday, same day as May the 4th for Star Wars Day. There was a Star Wars Free Comic Book Day title that was written by Charles Soule and Greg Pak, that was divided between the main Star Wars story with our central heroes and a Darth Vader story that actually tied right into the Darth Vader number 46 comic that came out this week with the return of, well, I won't even spoil it. Return of a character that I've been wondering what happened to her. There's a little teaser for you. But the High Republic Phase 3 also came out, and then for Free Comic Book Day, we also had a Young Jedi Adventures issue. Have you been keeping up with these comics, Trisha? Did you get to read any of these?
I'm not a big comic reader. My Hyperspace Theories co-host BJ Priester, he went to his comic book store and they had an acolyte photo op at his
Oh,
for free comic book day. So that was kind of interesting. A little bit of advertising going on for the upcoming Disney Plus series.
yeah, we should also mention, I forgot to mention with the Phantom Menace re-release, they had the Acolyte teaser trailer, and attached to that was kind of the extended fight scene between Carrie Ann Moss's character and Amandla Stenberg's character. So we got to get a little bit more of a taste of that show about a month before that premieres on Disney Plus. Very excited for that too. Some very heartwarming news from Children's Hospital LA. Katie Sackhoff appeared in costume as Bo-Katan Kryze, and whenever a celebrity does this and donates their time and actually goes out of their way to put on the costume, which is we know how difficult those can be to wear and move around in. And you can check out the pictures of these. They're floating around on Instagram. We have them on laughingplace.com. But yeah, it was just so cool to see Katie Sackhoff there meeting the children and representing Star Wars at the Children's Hospital LA. Did you get to see those pictures at all?
I'm a big fan of Katie, so it doesn't surprise me that she would do something like that. And I think she loves the character, so if they gave her a chance to get in the costume, I could see her doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Lastly, in Star Wars headlines for the week, like I said, we've got Revenge of the Fifth was Sunday, and then Revenge of the Sixth. Now they're doing, which was Monday, and we got new merchandise announcements from Amazon and Hasbro. I already pre-ordered this Emperor Palpatine Black Series box set. It comes with the throne and the Force Lightning and everything. But there's lots of stuff to look at. You can go and check that out. They've got them on StarWars.com, Amazon, and we have it over at Laughing Place. That's going to wrap up Star Wars headlines this week and get us into our main topic. Very excited to talk about this with you. Star Wars Tales of the Empire. This is kind of a follow-up to Star Wars Tales of the Jedi, which was another series of 6 animated shorts that came out in fall of 2022. Let's talk about that first. What was your experience with Tales of the Jedi back then in 2022?
Well, you remember Celebration Anaheim? They did the panel with Dave Filoni and uh, he brought a couple other people, Carrie Beck and I think
Yeah.
Athena Portillo, out on the stage. And That for Sarah Woloski and I, my Fangirls Going Rogue co-host, was like the most exciting panel of all the things that happened. So I've been into Tales of the Jedi since the beginning. Like I was on board, and so anything Tales of, I was like, let's do it.
I'm sure you, like me, you probably read the Tales of books, the like anthology short story collections that came out in the 90s. We had Tales of the Bounty Hunters, Tales from Jabba's Palace, Tales. I think there was a Tales from the Empire, Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina. Um, when you heard about these tales of animated shorts, were you hoping for something like what we got in those books 30 years ago?
I think I was expecting just something to, anything that was just going to be these little bits for
Yeah.
characters. It was all in it for me. And I think that's kind of what the idea of those stories were back in the day, is to just kind of explore characters and ideas and see what you got. And so I'm in for that kind of exploration.
Great. So yeah, that first batch of episodes in 2022, that was divided between Ahsoka Tano and Count Dooku. And now we've got Tales of the Empire, and these are focused on the characters of Morgan Elsbeth and Barriss Offee, who you know from The Mandalorian and Ahsoka and the Clone Wars, respectively. Uh, let's give our general thoughts here about Tales of the Empire. Now that this is out, everybody has had a chance to watch it. What did you think of the finished product of Tales of the Empire?
In the shortest form, I feel like this was surprisingly an exploration of the ideas of George Lucas on what it means to be a Jedi, even though the story is called Tales of the Empire. And it just fleshes out. I think if you were going to reintroduce young people or people who don't really have a really solid idea what Star Wars is, that kind of the roots of what it means to be on the light side is embedded in the story called Tales of the Empire. So I just thought there was this incredible bit of myth in it, Star Wars myth specifically, what it means to be on the light side or to reject the dark side, particularly in this. And so I was here for I watched it, and if you've watched it once, I recommend watching it again, because I feel like when you watch it the second time, you get some of the things that are the beginning, because it's like a big circle. The story completes itself, even though they seem like they're this disparate two different characters. There is a circle to this. There is, when people say Star Wars rhymes, it's in
Right.
this.
That's interesting to hear, and I'm curious to hear more about that from you as we go through this. But what jumped out to me on my first watch was that the Morgan Elsbeth segments are a prequel to what we saw in The Mandalorian and Ahsoka, and the Barriss Offee segments are a sequel to what we saw in the Clone Wars. So they're kind of overlapping in that era, the Imperial era that takes place between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. So I thought that was interesting. And yeah, like you, I just love getting these peeks at parts of the Star Wars galaxy that we probably wouldn't get to see anywhere else. And to me, this is a great avenue to explore that kind of thing and to dive deeper into these characters that likely are not going to get their own live action TV show or their own ongoing and long form animated series. So you have these little bite-sized stories. People, I think I'm not the biggest Clone Wars guy in the world, but I know people have been asking what happened to Barriss Offee after her story in the Clone Wars. And I, as a bigger fan of the Mandoverse, I've been very curious about what what are Morgan Elsbeth's origins? How did she come to work for Grand Admiral Thrawn? What is her history with the Night Sisters of Dathomir? And we got that here. So it's very appealing to me for all those reasons. I just want to mention, yeah, this show was created by Dave Filoni, of course. The writers were Amanda Rose Munoz, Matt Michnovitz, and Nicholas Anastasio. Directed by Nathaniel Villanueva, Stuart Lee, and Sal Ruiz. The producers were Dave Filoni, Carrie Beck, Athena Yvette Portillo, Josh Rhimes, and Alex Spotswood. And the music was by the Kiners. So we know Kevin Kiner from all of his work on Clone Wars and Rebels and Ahsoka. And he and his siblings, I believe, have contributed to the music for the Tales of the Empire. Let's talk about the two lead characters here, Morgan Elsbeth and Barris Offee, like I mentioned, voiced by Diana Lee Inosanto, reprising her role from live action, and Meredith Salinger, who I'm pretty sure also voiced her back in the Clone Wars days. But uh, Tricia, can you talk a little bit about Morgan Elsbeth and Barris Offee as characters and their roles in the larger Star Wars galaxy, and why these two feel like the right choice for this batch of Tales of the Empire animated shorts?
To be honest, I really thought Asajj Ventress was going to be a character that would come out in the next Tales, whatever it was going to be.
Mm,
And then she came into the Bad Batch, and I was like, maybe we're not going to get her in Tales. Maybe we're going to get somebody else. So Morgan was unexpected, but makes total sense because there's a lot of things I think they want us to know about the Night Sisters and Dathomir specifically. If you watch Tales of the Empire and you watch the end of Ahsoka, just by introducing Asajj Ventress in the Bad Batch and then introducing the things we learn in Morgan's story, in what's happening when Thrawn shows up on Dathomir at the end of Ahsoka season 1. What is happening? It's not what we thought it was. Right? Because there's a potential for the Mountain Clan to be
right.
there waiting for him. There's a potential that Asajj is back on Dathomir. It's not what we thought. He was just going to be riding into Dathomir and taking it over. So for that character, to me, it seems like, okay, he has a grander plan and he's taken some writers and some animation people, most of them from the Bad Batch, and said, let's explore these ideas a little bit. And then Barris is just, people love her. People love the character. She was integral in Ahsoka's journey in the Clone Wars, and then in being a friend, and then all of a sudden betraying her. And people want to know what happened to her. Why did she do that? And we get a little bit of a sense of why she did that. Essentially, she's a big her superpower is empathy, and it turned her to the dark side essentially, and empathy is what saves her in the end.
Yeah, it's yeah, you bring up some very interesting points there, like with the Night Sisters stuff. Obviously, the Night Sisters started they were introduced in Legends continuity in a book called The Courtship of Princess Leia. Was it Dave Wolverton who wrote that book? Um, and they have been carried over now into, the Clone Wars, and we've seen them now in live action, and we're getting more information about them in the current continuity here. Can you talk a little bit about how Dave Filoni and the people working with him, his team, are are choosing elements of the Legends continuity to bring over and highlight and feature in the current, what they would call canon, what many people would call canon? Um, what do you think the strategy is there? Why dip back into those older stories? What is the advantage of reviving things like that have been pushed aside into the Legends continuity?
Well, I think that if he's 5 years younger than I am, but I think he has read all the books. And when you see Morgan's story specifically, he reintroduces Pelion. Rook was in Star Wars Rebels, the no gray bodyguard that
Right.
Morgan is kind of tested with. And obviously Thrawn. And I feel like Thrawn in this story, we're seeing sort of the Thrawn that was that terrifying villain in the expanded universe, Heir to the Empire. And a lot of people thought we were going to get Heir to the Empire when they said Disney's taking over and we're getting a new movie. And then they sort of just said, and they were like, we're not going to do anything expanded universe. And I think Dave appreciates, as someone who read the books and cosplayed and went to conventions, that there are good things in the expanded universe. There are things that are a little shaky, but there are good things. And the Night Sisters, I think, is one of the compelling things. So the Mountain Clan is called the Singing Mountain Clan in Courtship of Princess Leia, and it's introduced. he's introducing this idea within the planet of Dathomir. There could be two different versions. They're almost like the Jedi and the Sith
Right.
on the planet, right? There's like this defensive light side. I mean, even when the mother defends them at the end, she uses this like big white power, and the Night Sisters are walking around all dressed in red. So it's not even like a subtle analog for Jedi and Sith, but just as it's like reintroducing the idea. But also just kind of this like love letter. There were things that people loved. The Nograi were very popular. Thrawn was very popular, and he
Yeah.
just keeps kind of dribbling them into Morgan's story in this way. I think's really intriguing.
Yeah, I get such a big kick out of seeing all this EU stuff brought into the current continuity, having grown up on that stuff. And yeah, you mentioned Rook, who is voiced by Warwick Davis. So it's great to see him involved or hear him involved. And then we got Palaeon, who had a cameo appearance at the end of Mandalorian season 3, very briefly. But Xander Berkeley, the actor who played him in live action, is back to voice him here. I also want to mention Disney legend Wing Ti Chow. He's a Disney Imagineer, an architect who has designed many, many buildings for Disney parks and Disney resorts all over the world, is back to voice the character of Wing, who is, I guess he's kind of the leader of that. What's the name of that planet? Do you remember? The planet that Morgan
Corvus.
Els. Yeah, there you go. And they talk a little bit about the history of how she's taken over here, because she's trying to set up a almost like an arms dealership and sell the idea of these TIE Defender ships to the Empire. But it was great to hear Wing back as that character. And yeah, I'm just loving all the EU stuff. Absolutely. I have a question for you, because I was scratching my head at the end of the Elsbeth segments, the very end, where you have this representative from the New Republic whose name was Nadura, voiced by Shelby Young, who does a lot of Star Wars voices. And she comes to Corvus and tries to persuade Elsbeth to surrender, basically, for her war crimes now that the Empire's gone. Instead, Morgan just decides to kill this whole delegate from the New Republic and blow up their ship. And Wing comes out and Nadura tells him, "Oh, you have the power basically to make this change, to call in help." And on her little comm link, there's a transmission, a distress call being sent out, and on the other end of that line, we hear the voice of Bo-Katan Kryze herself, voiced by Katie Sackhoff, who we were talking about earlier. Now, my question was, to your understanding, and maybe I just don't have a good understanding of the chronology of things here, but in my head, during this period, in the early days of the New Republic, like right before the Mandalorian takes place, Bo-Katan is mostly just trying to regain her throne on Mandalore and revive that planet to what it was before. Why do you think that she has this connection to the New Republic? And why do you think that distress call reaches her? Is it just a coincidence? Because what they're doing here is they want to set up what happens in the Mandalorian, because Bo-Katan knows that Ahsoka is off on Corvus hunting Grand Admiral Thrawn, so they have to make that connection. But did you understand why Bo-Katan picked up that distress call? I was just a little confused by that. Sorry, I think you're muted there. Oh,
I believe Dave Filoni has been trying since early in the Mandalorian to draw this parallel between the Mandalorians and the Jedi,
yeah.
and there's something else he wants to tell us, and we don't. I don't think it's wrong that you're confused. I think we're supposed to be like, what's happening? Like, why is this happening? I think that's what it's supposed to be, because I expected it to be Ahsoka's voice when
That would have made more sense to me, because she has the more direct connection to the New Republic.
yeah. Oh, so I just think it's a question that's out there for us, and I think he wants us to think about it. That's so I don't think being confused is the wrong thing, and
Okay.
it seems to me that we're right before that episode, The Jedi, right? Because we
Yeah.
see all the crispy trees that Ahsoka's running through, and Bo knows that Ahsoka's there, so potentially Bo answered the call and she sent Ahsoka, type of thing, or for some reason, or maybe Bo went and Ahsoka went later, but for some reason, he wants us to ponder what's happening there.
Interesting. Yeah, I was hoping that you would
I
know
don't
for
have an
sure.
answer. I'm
I'm
sorry.
I guess I'm glad that are equally as unsure about the answer to that as I was, because yeah, I was just left kind of scratching my head after that moment, but I'm sure there's an answer out there. Maybe we'll get it eventually. But yeah, it does give us that nice connection to what we saw on The Mandalorian. Is there anything else that jumped out to you about the Morgan Elsbeth segments, the 3 episodes that she was featured in, before we move on to talking about Barriss Offee?
Curiously enough, she just ends up this person that just is so willing to allow the same things to happen to other people that were inflicted upon her. And
Uh-huh.
she's just what compared to Barris's story where she says, "Live, I just want you to live" to people. Like Morgan's like, "I just want you to die
Right.
for me." And it's really kind of understated in the story, but there's kind of this idea that, some people still know she's a witch, that she's a night sister, and perhaps the villagers thought they could make a deal with a witch. That's a fairy tale
Yeah.
idea where,
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, we'll make a deal with a witch and she'll bring us prosperity." And that's not really ever what happens in a fairy tale, and obviously isn't what happened to them. I don't know why they still let Wing be the leader, because it's not going well for them in their town, having struck this bargain. And he's still kind of, maybe he feels responsible when we see him in The Mandalorian, when he finally does, helps out a little bit there. But Morgan is, I mean, we could say the obvious thing. The titles are the path of fear, the path of anger, the path of hate, right? And that's Yoda's teachings. If you went to see The
Right.
Phantom Menace, he specifically mentions those things. And the last thing is suffering. And we don't see suffering except that in the most horrible way, Morgan inflicts suffering on the Nadura, the ambassador, by crispying her. She's very toasted by the blast of her ship. And we open on Barris's story with her experiencing suffering of the Jedi Order being slaughtered. So it's there in the story.
Yeah, I'm very interested to hear your comparison and contrast between these 2 stories, because like you're saying, they do have a lot in common. They do kind of complement each other. Really quickly, I want to acknowledge some of the comments here. I keep forgetting to check. Chester Lugnut, hello. Thank you for joining in. Let's say hi to our friends from Skywalking Through Neverland, who know both of us. Yes. Thank you for watching. And Austin Henry, Tales of Star Wars. Yeah, we're talking about Tales of the Empire. And then let's see, I'm not sure what this was in reference to. Probably back in the Star Wars questions. Those were the 2 that Sarah chose as well. I'm not sure exactly which question that was. Uh, Keisha William, hello. And then Skywalking again says Tricia literally fell down on the floor, overcome with joy after that Star Wars Celebration Anaheim. That's funny. And then Stephen, hi from Wyoming. And she was clarifying here in the comments, posters. She chose the same 2 posters that you chose in the Star Wars questions. Getting back into Tales from the Empire, let's talk about the Barriss Offee segments here. Now, I asked you about the Night Sisters earlier. Let's ask the same question, but about the Inquisitorius program, because this is kind of the focus of the Barriss segments. We know she was in the Jedi Order. She got arrested at the end of her story, her arc in the Clone Wars, and now she's in sort of a republic prison on Coruscant. But from that point on, she gets kind of drafted into the Inquisitorius, or the Inquisitors program. What did we learn about how the Empire, or how the Grand Inquisitor and Darth Vader are finding candidates for the Inquisitorius in this animated series?
I feel like they're like Darth Vader light, right? They're not quite as strong as Anakin Skywalker. They're not as powerful, eh, but it's the same temptation, right?
Right.
Whatever, like I said, Barris's empathy was what got her in trouble. She knew that the Jedi Order, like, she didn't want to kill people. She didn't want to be a general, and that's actually explored in the expanded universe books, the MedStar books. There's a book, MedStar Jedi Healer, where she is in sort of a MASH unit, and she's out trying to heal people and is tempted by the dark side. So they're kind of going back to that idea. It's not a direct analog to the story, but it's the idea of that her empathy makes it hard for her to understand what why the Jedi are being generals of a clone army and killing people. Like, it doesn't make sense to her. She knows it's wrong, and she's young, and um the suggestion is Palpatine was whispering in her ear. He's probably whispering in the ears of all these people who end up inquisitors, and they're all brought into the fold, which I think Thrawn's story suggests that having people who are brought in that way makes them a weaker uh, version of what you want, right? And that's perhaps what we see in the Bad Batch, is they're trying to create these like clones that don't have individual thought, and maybe enhanced powers that could do exactly what that Palpatine wanted, whereas these Inquisitors are kind of like a step. Like, he needs some force ability, but he doesn't need too much force ability. But she shows that they aren't the best way for him to move forward with and that ultimately Anakin will turn back as well
Right.
when he gets the right trigger to say, you aren't doing the right thing.
Yeah, so getting into the kind of the parallels between these two stories, between Elsbeth and Offie here, they both kind of have these opportunities, these forks in the road to make a change, to choose to go toward the light instead of continue on a path toward the dark. And, partway through, in the middle installment of the Barris Offie episodes, she does realize that the Inquisitorious program, and basically, the entire empire is not operating the way that she would like to see people treat other people, and she goes off on her own path. But what do you think the difference is as characters for Morgan Elsbeth and Barris Offee? What makes them different enough so that they choose different paths? One chooses the dark and the other chooses the light.
I think Morgan's brought up in a society that sort of is going to lend her to be a dark sider anyway. The Night Sisters are that way, and Barris was brought up as a Jedi, and so part of it's just their kind of nurture of
Hmm.
who they are. And I feel like that second story in Barris's arc is where it's called The Realization, is sort of kind of a condensing of maybe a lot of events for her, where she's made several times this choice, and she ultimately realizes, I'm not a killer. I don't really want to be killing the people that I grew up with, and this isn't who I am. It's not, that story is not one event. I think it's sort of kind of amalgamation of many events, but they're trying to do something really tight in Tales of the Empire to get her to the point where she is in the last episode. So you kind of have to take it with this, like, you know, take it with a kind of that it's condensing a lot of things that
Okay.
happen into, and it's only, I think it's only like 11 minutes, that one. It's the
Hmm.
shortest episode, but there's a lot of power in her. I think that's one of the best lines in Star Wars storytelling, is when she says, you have one more Jedi you have left to deal with, to the Lynn.
Yeah. So you said earlier that you feel like this batch of episodes, this Tales of the Empire presented as a whole is a complete circle. When I first watched the ending of the Barris Offee segments a couple weeks ago with the screeners that went out, I think I texted Sarah and I was like, I felt like the Barris segment ended pretty abruptly, and it has kind of this open-ended conclusion where we're not really sure if she survives because she's been I mean, many characters have walked away from getting stabbed through the abdomen with a lightsaber at this point, so it's possible that she's still alive and out there somewhere. But did maybe this conclusion was more satisfying to you than it was to me? I was still left wanting more, I think, or wanting something more. I don't know, conclusive, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But what did you think of the very end of Tales of the Empire and the end of Barris's story?
I've had a little time to cook on it since Sarah and I talked about it in Fangirls Going Rogue because we talked about a lot of things. I do think that Tales of the Empire is sort of the Empire Strikes Back of the Tales story. So in the Empire Strikes Back, there's a lot of things that we're waiting and hoping to know, right? Like,
Yeah.
is Han okay? Will he survive? What's gonna happen to Luke? He lost his hand. He knows all these horrible things. So I feel like Tales of the Empire that you're left that way isn't wrong. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So you think this will be followed up on. Okay. I guess that leads me well, let me ask you first. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about Barris Offee and her segments in these Tales of the Empire shorts before we move along?
Do you think she's dead? Or
I
do you
I
think they
don't. I don't think so because I think I think I would know if she was dead, and I don't know that she's dead, so I think she's alive, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, when you look at how they worked the Empire Strikes Back, it's based, they're hoping that you recognize the fairy tale in the story and
Yeah.
that there won't be as unhappy endings. So I think that I think Barris's story is going to keep going.
But there's another great line there that, Barriss has to Lynn Rakish, the 4th sister, where she says, "You already know the way out,"
Yeah.
and I thought that really resonated with me, having giving her, again, this choice to follow a different path, and I think the implication there at the end is that Lynn also does choose to go toward the light, and that's how she finds her way out of the caves and finds her way out of the darkness metaphorically as well. Let's see. Sarah is saying Qui-Gon is like, damn, all I needed was a Bacta patch. I don't know. The Darth Maul must have hit a different spot with the lightsaber because
Well,
everybody
and
else seems to walk that off.
the one thing is Barris is a healer. She's got medical
Right.
facilities there. And the second thing is for, I think, Sabine, the implication is too that she's immediately rushed to medical facilities and taken care of. And that isn't necessarily what happens for Qui-Gon.
Right.
But, and also Barris is a healer. So maybe she has a little bit more knowledge on how to help herself as well.
I just think the bad guys in Star Wars need to learn once you stab through the abdomen, you just got to
Yeah,
move
run it
move the
through.
lightsaber around a little
Yeah, we'll
bit.
do Harry Carey in there.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you kind of hinted at this earlier that you think we're going to be getting more of Barris's story, but I'm curious what you think is the future of this Tales of series. We've gotten Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Empire. It seems like in all likelihood we know that things in Star Wars come in threes. So it seems like we'll probably be getting at least one more of these. But what do you think? Are you looking forward to more of these? Do you think that we will get Tales of the Sith, which I think is the one I've heard theorized most often, and maybe that's where we'll get the Asajj Ventress story?
I actually think it's going to be Tales of the Bounty Hunter.
Oh, okay.
And I think, well, Asajj could fit in there. Bo-Katan definitely could fit in there. I'm 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 75% certain Asajj is going to come back in animation, not in Tales. Like I think she's getting something else.
Okay.
That's just my read. But I think Tales of the Bounty Hunter makes sense because we have sort of the Jedi, the Empire. We could go to Sith. there's numerous possibilities, but I feel like Bounty Hunter gives them a lot more places to go. And I feel like these stories are leading into ideas from Kenobi of the Path. We know from the Bad Batch we have like the secret clone network. So how are all these rebel factions, including the Mandalorian, going to get woven together to become the people who fight at the Death Star? We see uh, Omega's potential future there at the end of the Bad Batch. So there's a lot of things that could happen. I mean, maybe Omega gets some Tales of the Bounty Hunter. Maybe that's where she ends up.
Hmm.
I don't know.
And the other question I have for you is, we've had, as far as like long form animated series in the current continuity, we have the Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, Star Wars Resistance, which only went a couple seasons, but I think that still counts, and the Bad Batch. Do you think as far as like the future of Lucasfilm animation goes, do you anticipate getting another multi-season animated series, or are we going to be focusing on these shorter form kind of animation short releases?
No, I think particularly in that Tales of the Jedi panel, Dave Filoni was laying out that he was mentoring people to take over and do the things he did with that when George Lucas taught him things. I'm pretty sure Jennifer Corbett and Brad Rao will continue working on animation, and that is a place where they can do different things and they can keep connecting with the younger audience. I don't think Star Wars animation is going anywhere,
Yeah.
and it'll continue. But Dave Filoni's going to be doing his film stuff. That's what he ultimately wanted to do. That's where he's going. But I think he's been kind of mentoring these people and giving them, guidance and ways to say they could step up into this. And after the ending of the Bad Batch, I don't think anybody would be upset if they said, "Hey, Jennifer Corbett, Brad Rao are going to run animation." I think everybody would be okay with that.
I think so. Yeah, and they have certainly proven themselves capable.
Yep.
I think it's also appealing to Disney and Lucasfilm on a budgetary level too, right? I mean, that's my understanding, not coming from that field, but I imagine it's cheaper to make an animated series than a live action one, right? So, and you also get, there's passionate fans who will consume everything, and I do feel like the animation, when I go to the conventions, Star Wars Celebration, even San Diego Comic Con, I do feel like the animation gets pretty heavily represented in the fandom. So it's worthwhile for the franchise. It's worthwhile for the business side of things too, in my opinion. Anything else that you would like to say about Lucasfilm Animation or Tales of the Empire specifically before we start wrapping up here?
No, I'm happy to have had it. It's one of those things you didn't know you needed in your life until they dropped it in your lap. So it was Carrie Beck who Dave
Yeah.
Filoni said he had some ideas. It was Carrie Beck who found him the money and the way to do it. So we appreciate that those things happened.
And I just love, I'll kind of reiterate something I said earlier, that I just love that they're filling in all these little gaps in the narrative of Star Wars, because that's kind of what I grew up on with the expanded universe in the 90s, is that it just felt like this big ever expanding tapestry where they just kind of filled in all these little gaps, and that's what it feels like they're doing now with the comics and novels and animation in between all the bigger stuff like the live action shows and movies. But I love all of it, and looking forward to more as always. Let's wrap up with the final segment here on Who's the Boss. It's called First Steps into a Larger World. This is where we talk about the media that we've been consuming and or enjoying outside of the Star Wars galaxy. My example this week, and I can talk about this now because the embargo is up, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I actually saw this with Richard and Sarah the other night at a press screening in Burbank and really enjoyed this film. I think the first two-thirds were great for me, and I was left a little disappointed by the ending. And Tricia, I don't think, have you seen this yet?
No,
Is this something that you're interested in?
I am.
I would say to you, because I know you are a student of the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell, that kind of stuff. this movie definitely follows that kind of storytelling format. And for those reasons, I think you would enjoy it. And I dug that aspect of it, and I thought the visual effects are great and the performances were great. And yeah, I think of all the big franchises that have been rebooted in the last 20 years or so, Planet of the Apes is up there for me. It's had a really good track record in the last few movies. So I would recommend this one. And that's coming out tomorrow as of this recording. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes from 20th Century Studios, owned by Disney nowadays. Tricia, what have you been watching or reading or playing any games lately, that kind of thing?
I'm actually into Three Body Problem on Netflix,
Okay.
which has a little bit of a Star Wars connection if you know anybody about the people behind the scenes. But it's written by a Chinese sci-fi writer, and it was translated to English. It's a very popular science fiction story by Ken Liu, who wrote The Legends of Luke Skywalker. And it was produced by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, who were
Yes.
going to be doing some Star Wars story, and also produced by Ryan Johnson and Rand Bergman from The Last Jedi. So, but it's an interesting science fiction story. Really cool characters. I think it's a definitely. It's one of those things that you start watching it, you start watching slowly, and then you watch an episode, you're like, I gotta watch the next one. So that type of it hooks you and gets you in.
It's been on my radar. I haven't checked it out yet. I think my wife, Tori, read the novel, and liked it, but we haven't watched the show. We have just this long list
I
of
know it seems like it
series. Yeah.
gets longer and longer, and then I have Bridgerton, so now
Oh,
I'm
gosh.
everything's screwed.
Yep, yep. But we'll, hopefully we'll eventually check it out. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Who's the Boss? It's actually the last one for a few weeks. Going to take a little bit of a hiatus before the Acolyte starts up at the beginning of June. So that's going to be the next episode. And I also want to send you over to Pop Culture Explorers Club, which is the other podcast I do with my friend Drew Gergich. And we just had an episode. Actually, it's coming out tomorrow as of this recording. It's all about the Planet of the Apes franchise leading up to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. We don't talk about that one, but Richard Wolosky from Skywalking Through Neverland is our guest for that one. And it was a lot of fun to talk about the apes with him. Thank you very much to Tricia Barr for coming back on the show and joining me to talk all about Star Wars and Tales of the Empire specifically. Tricia, where can people find you? Where do you want to send them if they want to discover more of your writings or talkings?
Well, you can go to Fangirl blog, fangirlblog.com. On there, I have hyperspace theories where we talk about definitely the hero's journey and the myth and break down, big chunks of the stories. Like we'll break down a whole season of The Mandalorian or The Bad Batch or what's happening. And then on Fangirls Going Rogue, Sarah and I talk about Star Wars from the female perspective. And again, Tales of the Empire is something that we have probably wanted and wished for and hoped for. And I said that in my review. It's like if I talked about things I wanted when I started my blog, and then when we did the podcast, we talked about women in the storytelling, about Star Wars myth and mythology, and the expanding universe. And I felt like when I got to Tales of the Empire, it was like, wow, it's all there. So maybe talking about it got me somewhere in life, or maybe not. But those, if Tales of the Empire and stuff like that interest you, then check those out. And I'm at Fangirl Cantina on any social media.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again. Like I said, come back in a month, early June. That'll be the next episode of Who's the Boss, talking all about the Acolyte. Boy, excited for some more live action Star Wars as well. I'm on Instagram at Who's the Boss Pod. And as always, please visit laughingplace.com for all your Disney news and opinions. Thanks to everybody out there watching live and listening to the audio version later on. See you real soon. My name is Mike Celestino, and thanks again to Tricia Barr.